And moderating for us is Dr. Daniel Gerstein. He is currently a senior researcher at RAND Corporation. He previously served at the Department of Homeland Security as acting undersecretary and deputy undersecretary for science and technology. He had a long career in the U.S. Army, where he was awarded the U.S. Army Soldier's Medal for Heroism. And he's also currently an adjunct professor at American University, and he just released a new book titled Tech Wars. So Dr. Gerstein, I'm happy to welcome you to the program. And joining Dr. Gerstein today, we have some excellent technology practitioners, including Dr. Ellen Voorhees, who is a fellow at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Mr. Nathan Manzotti with the GSA IT Centers of Excellence, where he is Director of Data and Analytics. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Gretchen Stewart, and she is the Chief Data Scientist for Intel Public Sector. So grateful to have you all here today. And just as a reminder for our audience, you can find full biographical details in our event page. And also please check out our exhibit hall for some relevant content. And Dr. Gerstein, it looks like we have all of your panelists here and ready to go. So I will be glad to turn it over to you.
Well, super. And thanks, Megan, for that very nice introduction. And thanks also for setting up this panel. I am very much looking forward to having a spirited conversation on these issues. I'm not going to spend any time on an opening statement. I want to jump right into it and have the panelists tell us a little bit about what they're thinking. And I want to start really by asking each of the panelists to talk about their responsibilities in developing AI capabilities within their respective organizations. So I think, I will ask Nathan to kick us off.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to participate in this panel today. I work in the Data Analytics Center of Excellence, which is part of Technology Transformation Services at the GSA. And what the Centers of Excellence do is primarily, we do a few things, but primarily we work with other federal agencies and assist them with their digital modernization efforts. So we have an Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence, Data Analytics Center of Excellence, where I work, cloud adoption, customer experience, and innovation adoption. We'll work with other federal agencies. They'll come to us and tell us what their priorities are, whether that be cloud adoption or data strategy, things like that. And then usually we'll assess the current state there and give them sets of recommendations. And really our projects run the gamut between actually migrating them to the cloud, introducing new advanced analytics and AI capabilities, and even doing strategy work and things like that. So a lot of the work that I do in particular sits on preparing the agency for adopting AI, right? So everything related to DevSecOps and data quality processes and all that kind of stuff. But in addition to the consulting that we do, we also run a number of communities of practice. One of those is the artificial intelligence community of practice, where we make resources and training available to the entire federal government. So it's a little bit about the COEs.
Great, thanks, Nathan. And Ellen, how about you?
Thank you. I work at NIST. NIST is a federal agency. It's part of the Commerce Department, known mostly for its measuring of things. And the things that I measure are language technologies, and in particular search, as in search engines. My work in particular has largely been mostly on the research end of things, not so much on direct standards making, but NIST of course does do that. The work that I've done at NIST has largely focused on creating test sets. So these are benchmark tests for a variety of different tasks, most of them related to language. In my case, most of them related to language tasks. But NIST, of course, also has biometrics and voice things and cybersecurity, and a whole lot of other things.
Great. And Gretchen, what are your thoughts?
Hey, good morning, everybody. So I'm the chief data scientist for Intel working in the public sector. So I honestly have the lucky job of really being able to be the, I'll call it the translator. So working directly with all of you from a government perspective, but then really going back to our business units and making sure that we are designing the right technology and that we are building into our processors, whether they be, field programmable gate arrays or CPU, even silicon photonics, really thinking about what we need to design to be able to get the answers faster with incredible accuracy to all the work that is important to the government. And so I spend a lot of time, as both Nathan and Ellen talked about, ensuring that we understand where is the data, what format is the data in, and really working with the government customers to help define those processes and what might make the most sense. Is it an object detection? Is it potentially recommender engine? What kind of math equations, what kind of statistics should we be using? And I'm really excited to be part of this panel and to really talk about that. Plus, as an example, one of the things that I do internally at Intel is sit on our Responsible AI Council to really review all the work that we do, whether it be hardware, whether it be creating data sets, whether it be training, creating models, ensuring that we're doing it with the right impact in mind and a good impact as opposed to a bad.
Great. So, all three of you have spoken about data in this early entry discussion that we've had. And I want to pick up on that theme and just ask you a little bit about data and to think about how do you know when you have enough data and if it's the right data? Talk a little bit about that. And Gretchen, since you're, we'll start with you this time.
Sure. So I honestly, stepping back, want to make sure that when we're having those kind of conversations, that we're really looking at it from the use case in terms of what's the problem that you're trying to solve. Because I definitely say this a lot, and I think it's really true. The government probably has the most amount of data on the planet. They collect a tremendous amount, especially you think about Homeland Security, and not only from a TSA perspective or FEMA or the law enforcement piece, they're collecting immense amounts of data all the time. And so to your point, is it the right data? And so really coming back from, hey, what is it that we're trying to solve? And then understanding, well, what's the data that we would need to solve that? And one of the things that I've seen within some of the divisions like Border Patrol and others, they're starting to marry those really smart domain experts with the data scientists or the coders, and really understanding that while you might have a brilliant degree in computer science, if you don't really understand the mission, that sometimes the work that you're doing or pulling different data from different places isn't presenting an answer and a heat map or something that would be helpful for, as example, like a Border Patrol. And so I really think that that's a smart thing that I'm seeing happen more and more, is people are starting to realize that you need to marry those domain experts with the technical resources to ensure that you have the right data.
Great. Ellen, how about picking up on some of those themes and talk a little bit about the data? And I'd also be interested if you have any experience thinking about the domain experts linking up with the data scientists as well.
Yes, sure. I can't emphasize enough of how much I agree with Gretchen that the question is not how much data you have. It's, first of all, what problem are you trying to solve? Right? Without knowing what problem you're trying to solve, everything else is hopeless. And then it's still not even what size of your data, because data comes in all sorts of different cleanliness and if it's a lot of redundant data, then it doesn't really matter how big it is. So once you know what problem to solve and what data would be helpful to solve it, you then can look at, is the data that you have representative of the cases that you will have to solve with it. And so it's much more representativeness of the data that you need. With regard to whether I've seen domain experts getting involved with the data, the technical end of things, yes, certainly. In this program that I've been running at NIST called TREC, it stands for the Text Retrieval Conference, the focus has been on search engines in various different forms. But the whole thing started as a DARPA program in where we were trying to help intelligence analysts, right? And it's very definitely the case that the intelligence analysts were informing the DARPA program, which were in turn informing the sorts of problems that we were looking at. Now we've branched out somewhat more than that, but it's still the case that our human assessors, the people who make our judgments for us, to make our data sets, are still largely retired intelligence analysts, right? So and except in those cases where for instance, we have several tasks within medical, and in which case we use physicians to make our judgments, right? So it's always this case that we're trying to tie it back to the real user, or at least surrogates for the real user. Always keeping in mind that the problem first and most is, what problem are you trying to solve? A somewhat technical answer to the question of how much is enough data, it's not a very actionable answer, but it's a technical answer, right? You know that you have enough data and representative data if the model that you're building is stable and generalizes well. But that's sort of, an answer only after the fact. So if it doesn't do those, then you probably have to go get more data. I'll stop there.
Excellent. Nathan, how about you? What are your thoughts from a GSA perspective?
Well, I think Gretchen and Ellen really nailed it already. And I agree with everything that they're saying. As far as the domain experts being involved with analysis and the technical teams, in my experience working with other agencies than GSA, I've seen two different scenarios. One in which the domain experts have no insight into what IT is doing, and then another scenario in which the domain experts are spending a lot of time dealing with technology and being forced to, learn skill sets that take them away from using that domain expertise. And I think from an operational standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to try to find the correct balance and structure in the organization so that the domain experts have the support from IT with advanced technical skill sets, right? And, they can work productively with the data scientists, to do what they need to do and use the data efficiently. In terms of how much data that you need, again, I agree completely with what Gretchen was saying, that you have to start with the use case and work backwards from there. And also, rather than amount of data, it's about the quality of the data and representation of the real world use case. So having processes through which that data is checked to make sure that it has all the components that are useful for the analysis on a continuous basis, and that when it updates doesn't get corrupted and things like that is really, I think, the more important aspect to focus on.
Well, Nathan, let me pick up on that last point that you made. So what are some of the tools that you like to think about in terms of verification of your data set? And really, it comes back to, how do you convince yourself that you've got the right and enough data to go forward with an operational system per se?
Well, I think it has to do with testing and with having those domain experts involved with the data ingestion process. So having a tool that first can flag outliers and spikes in the data, abnormal aspects, right? Like if a value is usually within a certain range. And as far as tool sets, there's a lot of them out there. So the right one depends on the use case again, right? But having some tool that monitors data as it moves through those analytics pipelines and flags for anomalies, and then making sure that that data flows to the correct domain expert so that they can check it and then have a feedback process to correct it. That's important. So did that
Ellen,
answer your question?
Yeah, that was terrific. Ellen or Gretchen, anything to add on the verification of the data set? Or do you thumbs up on Nathan?
Well, clearly you do want your data to be good. Within sorts of the tasks that I run, it's actually not necessarily clear what good data is, though. And so depending upon what problem you have and what you're trying to do, the definition of good data will not necessarily be clear. And in particular, the types of tasks that I run, we're trying to do sort of generic language stuff, and so like ungrammatical language is still language that we have to take care of. So I would caution people against trying to make their data more clean than their task actually supports.
Gretchen, anything to add on that?
No, I think Ellen brings up a really brilliant point. I find that lots of times it's really as Nathan had mentioned, in the testing. So you might train your model based on certain data that you have, and then you apply it. And it's that combination of, a domain expert who will say, hey, either the model is not right or the data that you're using to train, because the results that you're using on data that I'm aware of isn't giving me an answer that I would expect. So I think some of it really is the trial and error, but it is that communication. And it's also, I think, ensuring that you have a number of people with different expertise who are really reviewing it to ensure, as I like to say, data science is a team sport. It's nothing that somebody does sitting in a vacuum by themselves.
Great. I'm going to pick on you again, Gretchen. I'm going to have you start off this question. And part of the reason I'm going to do that is because you're the only one on the panel who represents industry. And so my question, and I'll ask this for the group because I think it's relevant for all, but what do you see as the roles of government and the private sector in the development and fielding of AI capabilities? So really a two-part question.
And thank you for that. And the truth is, I think we are representative of the kind of joint work between NIST and GSA and a company like Intel, since back in the 50s. So folks may not realize this, but the first artificial intelligence and machine learning conference was in 1956 at Dartmouth College. And that was funded by NSF funds and other parts of the government. And it was a combination of academic and industry and government coming together and saying, hey, we have some hard problems and we need to do this together. And the truth is we, have been involved with, DARPA projects and others. And I think that it is the combination. And I think truthfully, sometimes, and again, I work for Intel and we have been around for a while, but I do see sometimes that people get very excited about the latest bright, shiny object. And that the truth is, sometimes it really is talking to, the AWSs and the Google and the Intels and others about how is it best to solve this. And absolutely, some of those latest bright, shiny products are perfect for a niche piece of it. But I think what it just shows is, again, it is a team working together. You need the hardware, you need the software, you need the right connectivity, whether it be 5G or, future kind of communications, and the comm that is being used today on the battlefield is a great example. And you need all of us working together to be able to solve the problem. No one can do it by themselves.
So do you carve out a specific role, though? I mean, obviously industry is doing a lot of the early, research on these areas and bringing it forward. What do you want from the government in this dialogue?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that there are advisory boards where, sometimes Intel is on them, and selfishly, sometimes we're not. So I don't always feel that you get maybe the hardware perspective, because software doesn't work without hardware. Hardware doesn't work without software, if you know what I mean. And that I think part of what we've been trying to do is partner more with universities, and also have a part of our company called Intel Capital, where we are investing. Last year alone, we invested over $2 billion in AI companies. And those are startups. And honestly, previously, a number of years ago, we invested in startups like VMware and others that people have absolutely heard about. So I think it's that combination of not only developing it in our labs, working directly with the DARPAs, IARPAs, NSF, et cetera, but it's also investing in those new technologies so that we can solve the problems.
Super. So Ellen, let me turn that question to you. And again, just to remind you, it's what are the roles of both government and the private sector in this relationship? And obviously NIST is at a critical juncture. And so talk a little bit about how you see that and what your role as a representative of NIST actually is in this space.
So certainly within the projects that I've been involved with at NIST, the focus has been on technology transfer, right? It's been largely research area, but technology transfer has been a major component of what the tests that we run do, and that's not just technology transfer necessarily between academia and industry, but among different industrial partners and among different academic partners, so sort of all around. And that's a really exciting part of what the program does. Within the research realm right now, within language processing, at least, it's probably actually right now the industry that has the resources in order to build these large language models, right? And it's actually not happening so much in academia because of the need for large amounts of data and large amount of compute power. And that's somewhat of a problem, actually, that the power is sort of being concentrated in a handful of proprietary places. And so one of the things that NIST would like to be facilitating there is more open science, more open access to a variety of these different types of things.
Great. Nathan, what's your thought on this very important question?
So, with GSA, obviously, the Federal Acquisition Service exists to leverage private industry, for the betterment of the government, right? So we do a lot with industry directly through acquisition, and that's a big part of what the COEs do. In addition to that, through the communities of practice, we have started to work with academia. So recently, the communities of practice, artificial intelligence community of practice, facilitated a session where Stanford Human AI Interaction, HAI is the acronym. I don't fully remember what it is, but they came in and conducted a set of workshops that were accessible to anybody in the federal government. So, working with academia to make those insights and research available to, federal practitioners of technology is important. And then also, utilizing acquisition to get access to emerging technologies and the advances that are going on is something that GSA is definitely directly involved in. I think another role of the government is to make sure that these new technologies, while they're great, are applied appropriately, right, to improve the experience of the citizen, right? And so that kind of goes back to the last question that we were talking about, appropriate use of data, how much data do you need, quality, and things like that. I think part of the government's role is to work on processes through which, tools can be verified that they're appropriate for how they're deployed. For instance, if there was a tool that, say, there's an agency that services the whole country, right? but there's a tool that was developed with only data from a certain part of the country, a region, East Coast or something. Verifying that same, that the situation is similar enough on the other side of the country that that model can be used over there, and having processes to verify the training, that, the data that's used in development. I think that's also an important role of the government.
Great. Let me switch gears a little bit and ask you kind of a think question. I'm sure you deal with this in your daily lives, but what does responsible artificial intelligence development look like from your vantage points? Ellen, why don't you start us off?
Okay, thank you. NIST has an entire new program, or I don't know how new you want to count it as new, looking at responsible AI. And just for people who may not be aware, NIST is at Congress's direction creating a framework, right, an AI risk management framework. And within part of that risk management framework work, not within the framework itself, but as the encompassing work around it, has articulated a set of principles about what AI systems in general should include. And these are such things as being accuracy, right? It actually does what it says it's supposed to do. Mitigation of harmful bias, right? So, and that's what Nathan was just getting at, that you want to make sure that whatever task is to be done is being done appropriately across different demographics. Safety, which is, sort of do no harm, to robustness is being able to accommodate inputs which you might not necessarily have expected, or so lack of brittleness is another way of looking at that, by also respecting people's privacy. And those people could be a wide variety of things, right? It might not just be the users, it could be also the people from whose the data was originally taken in order to train the models, right? And a lot of these principles, while all individually, I think everybody could agree that individually they are fine principles. There's also, unfortunately, sort of conflict between some of them, right? Your accuracy is likely to improve if you have more data, but then your privacy is also likely to be more, somebody's privacy is likely to be more compromised. And so the risk management framework is a mechanism for people to work through on their own problems and with their own sets of principles, how it is that a particular application might be affected by any of these, and and what mitigation strategies is the company or whoever organization willing to accept with these risks.
Great. Gretchen, how about giving us that industry perspective on that question about responsible AI?
Sure, and I will also give huge kudos to NIST and Ellen and team who have pulled together folks to look at this. Who, as she mentioned, the AI risk framework, that was open for comments till I think it was last week, and then this is either the second or the third workshop that's been going on. So they have been really looking at getting as much input from folks like Intel and others. But from our perspective, not fully having standards yet. I know that they're, being worked on, and since they're not there, really started to look at, and Ellen's talked about several of them in terms of think about personal privacy, also think about the security, the safety, the overall reliability. Can it be tampered with? Are these models that, have some proven track record? We also really always want to ensure that there's human oversight, so that no matter what, it's not only machine to machine, but there's a human in the middle reviewing this. We also want to ensure we really do respect human rights, and that it's explainable. And so as an industry company, what we did is we created our ethical impact assessment as part of our responsible AI. And it literally is a form that people have to fill out and really think through, both from a hardware and a software perspective, of what's the project, what's the data sets, how are you leveraging this in terms of your model details, what's the extended use, are there any caveats, what are the ethical considerations that you've thought about, what are those factors, metrics, training and validation data, really going through and having people think through this, as opposed to, as I say, we build it in as opposed to bolt it on. So the idea is really build this in from the beginning of our designs, whether they be hardware or software, and ensure that we're thinking about this in an iterative process before we even release any of our projects or software. And we try and do the majority of the software in an open standard format. So it's available for others to use. We've explained, we might have software like an OpenVino or AI toolkits, but they're all based on leveraging open source tools so that people can be able to understand, leverage, and use.
So before I ask Nathan to answer that same question, I just want to pick up on one thing you said. And I wonder if when we look to the future of artificial intelligence, where we're talking machine-to-machine communications and such, and you talked about the need for maintaining humans in the loop. How do we do that given what the future portends for this expanding field?
Yeah, if I had a crystal ball, maybe, but I can tell you there was a really great book that came out of Harvard Business Library, and it was called Human Plus the Machine. And I think it really does a tremendous job to have people think about the fact that there are jobs that are going to be created that we don't even think about today. And there are other jobs that, due to this technology, are going to be eliminated. But that in the end, it's a shifting, it's an upskilling, it's, maybe a change for some people, but there's always going to need to be some kind of review from a human in the process, again, kind of depending on what it is.
Right.
But I truly believe that, in some cases, absolutely situational awareness on the battlefield, you can do a quick machine to machine, maybe it's multiple drones, you're doing some swarm kind of technology, you can absolutely have those answers be done. But at the same time, if what you're really doing is putting a target potentially to what might be a civilian versus the target itself, you absolutely do need a human to do those reviews. And that's how it's done today.
Yeah, great. Nathan, how about you? What are your thoughts on this question of what responsible AI looks like?
Well, I think that, just fleshing out some of the things I already mentioned, like, in this working on the risk management framework, the Biden administration announced the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights, right? These are the type of processes that are gonna allow standards for responsible AI to be used. The government does all sorts of review processes across different industries, right? And we have FedRAMP for software security. You can go on all day talking about government reviews, right? So I think that considering AI is, relatively new, but it's maturing. It's really about that process of defining what responsible AI looks like, so that everybody has a standard to compare their products against, and also, monitoring when they're up and running to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. Those are the keys.
We actually have an audience question that dovetails nicely with the question I was going to ask. And so I'm going to bring in the audience's question. And what this has to do with is, artificial intelligence is likely to be something akin to what cyber is. It'll be in everything. It'll be running in the background and we won't necessarily realize it. It'll come at the intersection in this particular case, the individual brought up things like blockchain and artificial intelligence, edge computing and artificial intelligence. And so the question is, that really makes it more complex when you think about having to validate and verify what you're doing with the artificial intelligence platform. Have you thought about how the convergence of multiple technologies needs to be factored into the development and then the later certification of these technologies? And I don't know, Gretchen, why don't you start us off with that?
Sure. And I think about, because I did listen into Dr. Brothers in the first hour of this tremendous work that Megan and team have done in terms of pulling this together. And they talked about, initially remote process automation. So leveraging natural language processing just to simplify and make some of their processes easier and faster. What was the beginning for some people. And to your point, that's absolutely going to continue and going to get more accurate and faster as we move forward. And then you think about, again, another example I think that somebody mentioned was customizing your experience through TSA. Maybe you really do want a touchless experience going in and out of the airport, whether it be parking your car, whether it be getting to the gate, whether it be getting on the plane, ordering your food, getting off the plane, getting your car, or getting the Lyft or Uber. And the idea is that you need to think about it from the connection at the beginning to the end. And I think, as I said earlier, I think it's really important to build this in from the beginning. So don't bolt it on, which is what I've seen, honestly, in some cases from a cyber perspective, where the systems are already built, so we're going to bolt on some software. Well, in some cases, some of that software does have the ability to be hacked into. So maybe if the software was connected all the way down to the bare metal, i.e. the hardware, that combination could be a better guarantee. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we've been thinking through in concert with government customers at the edge. How do we ensure that maybe there's just microservices, i.e. just what's needed to run the algorithms and the work that you're doing at the edge, and not everything? And how do you ensure that you keep the data that you need to, but the rest of the data just kind of falls to the floor if you don't need that? So it really is, mapping that whole process out and really looking at the touch points. And again, back to, I think, something that we all had said earlier, not only having the domain experts, but having people who, as part of those standards, have that equity and diversity and inclusion of thinking in a different way. Because, I have to admit, I'm a Pollyanna. I never think that somebody would use what we develop for bad, but they absolutely do. And you need people who spend their life looking at the bad guys to make sure that they are indeed thinking about how those systems could be broken into. And just, again, having that combination of, it being a team sport.
Great. Nathan, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it really kind of goes back to the last question. It's about defining these review processes for these technologies. Like you said in the beginning, AI, blockchain, they're going to mostly exist in the background, right? And we already see that in a lot of tools today. So sometimes when people ask, how are agencies adopting artificial intelligence? My knee-jerk reaction is to say, by procuring software that already has it in it. Like we see data visualization tools with pretty cool functionality now, right? That can do predictive analytics with a click of a button, and it's using machine learning in the background. The banking system is adopting all these blockchain technologies for credit card transfers and stuff, right, underneath the hood. So I think it really just boils down to having review processes that's going to be something similar to FedRAMP, right, where these tools are verified and then they're continuously evaluated to make sure that they're still doing what they're supposed to do. And having robust criteria that allows for those reviews to happen is the first step, and that's in progress. So looking forward to see what's going to happen over the next couple of years with this type of guidance coming out.
Great, thanks. Ellen, how about your thoughts on that?
So when we start talking about the ubiquity of AI, it brings to the forefront my uncomfortableness of treating AI as a monolithic thing, right? AI is much more a tool than a thing, right? I mean, so you don't actually talk about screwdrivers doing X, Y, and Z, right? It's what you're trying to accomplish with the tool. So frequently when people are talking about AI these days, they mean some combination of deep learning, neural networks, model building. And even that, you have a wide variety of different reasons and ways in which you can do that. And I think all of this responsibility and ethical questions, to be really meaningful, it's all going to go back again to what is it you're actually trying to do and how are you doing it? And to Gretchen's point about sort of having different perspectives in there, that the different technology could be used for ill as well as good. I really want to emphasize that point also, right? The exact same technology that you use for one thing can be used nefariously in another way, right? I think the current most obvious example of that was fairly recently. There was a group of people trying to develop new drugs for Alzheimer's, and they were doing that by using machine learning to build new proteins, and with almost no change of their algorithm, it could just as easily be developing new chemical weapons that have never been seen before also, right? And so it's not the technology, it's not the AI that has to be responsible. It's the application and the purpose. And all of that is highly contextualized and highly nuanced, which doesn't make for good sound bites, right? Nuance is never a good sound bite. Nuance is never a thing you tweet about, but it all lives there, right? The real problems all live in the nuances and the context. And I think that's going to be the place where people have to really start looking at the hard problems is within the nuances and the actual uses that are being put forth.
Great. I want to sort of pick up a little bit on this. I think you were already kind of nibbling around the edges on it, but what do you see as the greatest challenges with regard to the public acceptance of artificial intelligence? And then how can they be mitigated? So, Ellen, why don't we start with you? I mean, NIST has the unenviable job of having to develop the standards around the technology that can help to mitigate some of this. What do you have in terms of public acceptance?
So my own personal opinion here is that the biggest problem is a communication problem. And as such, their problems are much more sociological than technical. And the communication problem is that pretty much anytime you see AI talked about, at least for public facing, articles, it's either breathlessly glowing or, doom is imminent, right? I mean, and it's always one of these two poles. And of course, for any given thing, it's almost never either one of those, right? There are these nuances. I mean, and people fear things they don't understand, and AI is frequently treated as magic. And I think that's a problem, right? It's not magic. And if you treat it as magic, there's going to be a lot of resistance, understandably and probably appropriately. So my personal belief is that the biggest problems for acceptance is actually getting people to understand what it is. And in order for people to understand what it is, again, it's going to have to be much more concrete and in particular problem than just AI is doing, is going to annihilate humankind. So.
Excellent answer. So Gretchen, industry must not only be thinking about those scary cases, but also the liabilities that could result from artificial intelligence. So how do you view this problem?
Yeah, and I honestly couldn't say it any better than Ellen said. I mean, she's absolutely right. There are things in the headlines, AI gone wrong, like the redlining with mortgages, or the blueberry muffin that looks like a chihuahua, and then all of a sudden your muffin is a dog when you're doing some of those inferences. So I think for us, what we're really looking at is, in addition to, as an engineer, everything's black and white. Well, as Ellen said so eloquently, it's really gray. And that's what a lot of this discussion is about. And so for us, we're also looking at, it does make sense to design, as I call them, fit for purpose hardware, where not all hardware is best for what we're trying to accomplish. What is that problem? Is it really around leveraging a natural language processing, or is it something that we're looking at deep neural nets and we're talking about not just 12 to 15 or 30 layers, but maybe a couple hundreds of layers or thousands of layers? And therefore you need different hardware to be able to accomplish that. So we really are looking at, as I call it, a fit for purpose. What's the best hardware design to solve the problem? And yes, sometimes it can be, a general CPU, but there are times you really do need to build hardware that is neuromorphic, or a neural processor that does that kind of algorithm best. And then really leveraging AI to read through code and be able to say, hey, this particular part of the code is going to be best on this particular hardware, an FPGA or a CPU or some other kind of XPU. And so that's really where we're trying to ensure that we build in that gray. So we do understand the black and white, but that there are other options from a hardware and a software perspective to help solve these problems. But as Ellen said beautifully, it goes back to, what's the problem? What are we trying to solve?
Great. So let me ask in a different direction, and this is a little outside of the discussion, perhaps, but let's just think a little bit about this idea of leadership in artificial intelligence. I'm thinking about global leadership, and so I guess the question I'd like to have you address is, what are the advantages that we would gain if we became or established ourselves as the leader in artificial intelligence? Talk a little bit about that. And I think, Gretchen, you might be a good one to start on that, actually, because you have both the industry perspective, and you are a global company. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, some of us thinking about that are part of the reason why we're building our factories, building additional fabrication factories in the United States, is really thinking about, as you said, being a global leader, but it comes from that combination of hardware and software. And for us, it's not only where we're building, but where we're sourcing. So part of our ethical requirements from an artificial intelligence perspective, even for the software that we are using, is understanding, is the company ethical? Do they follow what we would consider global human rights, criteria, et cetera? And if they are, then there's someone we would work with. And if they're not, there's someone we will not work with. And we really do take that very seriously, even down to the people that are supplying the chemicals and the components and the things that are needed for us to, turn sand into silicon.
Nathan, what is your perspective on that?
Well, my initial reaction to that question is, what does it mean to be the global leader in artificial intelligence, right? Different people will think about different things, right? Like when you first say, well, if we were the global leader in the terms of, geopolitical situation and defense, right? is that we have the most advanced Terminator style, artificial intelligence robot, right? Or, are we using machine learning and AI and advanced analytics in ways that it makes the lives of American citizens better, right? So, where we integrate these technologies into products and services in a way that just makes everyone's life easier, and makes processes run efficiently, cost optimization and stuff like that. And which one, as a country, are we striving for, right? So that's kind of what I think, and I think, striving for the second scenario that I described is probably what the government should focus on, right?
Okay.
And there's a lot of efforts in that direction. So,
Ellen, how about your thoughts?
So when you sent these questions and I saw this one for the first time, that was my first thought too, was what do you mean by global leadership, right? Because there's all sorts of ways that you could be the leader. It could be, the best technology or the most research or the most money or the most deployed systems or anything, or the most users of systems or whatever. From a research perspective, I think being a leader means that it's important to be a leader, however you want to define it, because it's the leaders who set the research agenda. All right, it's the leaders who get to say, what it is that we're actually going to focus on. And what systems will get built. And those who are leading and therefore deciding are probably going to develop technology which is more in sync with the culture of that of whatever area it is that is leading, right? So you both get to set the agenda, but then it's also that agenda is more likely to be with, or the resulting systems are more likely to be more in sync with the dominant culture. That's all well and good as long as the dominant culture is such that, right, it at least acknowledges that there are other cultures and there are other ways of doing things. But from my own personal perspective, I think the importance there is being able to be the one setting the agenda.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you three have hit this last question right where it needs to go. And that is, it's important to have a leadership role. Being the leader and defining what that means needs to certainly be done. But, having a voice within the international community requires that you've done research and development and that you do have some leadership capacity there. So just by, by way of closing out that discussion. And I see that Megan has joined us and she's about to pull us.
Well, I was going to say, Dr. Gerstein, first of all, excellent panel. This has been fascinating, but I think we can do maybe one final round robin with your panelists.
So in the last panel, you asked what their concluding thoughts was. And so my question for each of you is, what are your concluding thoughts? Anything that we didn't talk about that you would have liked to have mentioned, or something else that you would like to elaborate on? Nathan, why don't you start us off?
Well, I guess I'll close with, kind of piggybacking on what Ellen was saying and in the last question, which was kind of what I was trying to get at in my answer, but I feel like she said it much more eloquently. And that's, to being a leader in artificial intelligence, machine learning, right, is important for us because it allows us, on the global stage to set the example and, promote American values, right? So, and I see that there's a lot of different efforts going on in the government, so it's an exciting time to be in the space, and looking forward to developments in the future.
Ellen, what are your thoughts? Concluding thoughts.
Okay, so I would like to just re-emphasize what we started with in the beginning, which is know what you're trying to do, right? Know what your problem is and why you're solving it, and the how will come. But if you don't know what you're doing or why you're doing it, then everything gets much more complicated.
Super. And Gretchen.
I don't think I could have said that any better. I think what it just says for all of us is we need to work on creating a data savvy workforce who's curious and who wants to solve complex problems. And that, as Ellen said, and Nathan too, artificial intelligence and machine learning are techniques. They're techniques to solve problems. So the better you are at understanding that data, and then being able to apply and be curious and ask the right questions, I think is really important. And then one thing that Ellen touched on that I think we all need to never forget is culture and the acceptance, and trying to figure out how to explain what this is so that people do accept it more quickly.
And I'll just take the moderator's prerogative, and I'll finish up and give you some of my thoughts. First, great panel. I mean, absolutely terrific insights. And it was very helpful, I think, for coalescing around some very important issues. I took sort of 4 big points away. The first is about the use case and the requirements. And I think that's really important to understand how those two are related to each other, and that they really can't be separated when we think about that. We have to understand the requirements and understand the use cases as well. The joint work and the collaboration, I was heartened to hear the discussion about the government and the private sector working together and each having a role. And so, that I think that is something to take away. I also like the concept that, instead of thinking of AI as, something that it's not, think about it as a tool, and, not necessarily just fixate on the concept of AI, but how it can be employed. And then finally, this idea of getting people to understand artificial intelligence is a very important thing. So those are my takeaways.